Bradley, it's time.
It's finally time. We did parts 1 and 2 of Mother of Learning individually. We're kind of doing a bundle deal of 3 and 4 right now.
A bundle deal. Two for the price of one. It's funny because it's more that we just kind of forgot that we finished three for a little bit, and then four was gonna come out like a month or two after because we got to part three pretty quick, and we both really enjoyed it, but I think we just like enjoyed it so much that we got engrossed and forgot to talk about it in general.
And while I do really love part 4, and I still think it's really good, I think when I was freshly coming off part 4, I considered it my favorite. I think 3 might be peak still.
I agree, actually, which makes it really funny that it's like not the main topic of what we're gonna talk about
I know,
today.
and like, not to say part 4 is bad.
I'd say it's my second favorite to throw it out there.
Like, it unmistakably, there were some dropped balls in the finale, but it like, God, it was still pretty damn good. I think the best thing about part 4 is the pacing.
Yeah, actually, because there's only one part in part four that I felt like it was dragging, and honestly, I can't even place what it was. I want to say it was, kind of like the 6 month period where the temporary loopers were there, but even then, that had a lot of good stuff, so that's probably not even it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, to give an overview of like what part 3 and 4 were. So part 2 ended off. I think like the last third of part 2 is when Zack and Zorian were together, but they still kind of thought Red Robe was in the time loop, so they were playing it low key.
Yeah.
Part 2 ends with them finally getting to the Sovereign Gate, and they discover that Red Robe left like years and years and years ago. So they could have been doing whatever they wanted this whole time.
Which opens up 3 with a bunch of answers. I remember that.
Oh yeah, so three is like they finally learned what the time loop is, but more importantly, 3 is like there's no bad guy in the time loop with us, so we can run around, spend all the money we want, do whatever we want. 3 is like they're traveling all around the world, and then 3 ends, I believe, with, let's see. I know 3 ends with them teaming up with the Lich, Quatach Ichel, to rob the bank, and then he learns of the existence of the time loop and attacks them, which leads to, honestly, kind of one of my favorite moments in the book, which is the starting scene of Book 4. The beginning of Book 4 starts with Zorian just in awe of the Lich, because he's like, the entire point of a Lich is they do everything they do to avoid dying.
Yeah.
And this is from his perspective, this Lich spent over 1,000 years doing everything he could to avoid dying. And then within seconds of learning that he was a copy, he had the resolve to sacrifice himself for his real self. And Zorian was like, I never accounted for that, because who the fuck would do that?
That's crazy. But Zorian, your simulacrums were pretty quick and easy to start offering themselves as well. So
yeah.
maybe there's some. Maybe you're the next closest thing to Quatach Ichel then.
I think part 3 is when Zorian starts doing his simulacrums.
Yes.
And I think in our part 2 talk, he was learning how to make them, and I think we were wondering like, how is that gonna go? Because obviously we're gonna have to learn what the implications of this are, and I kind of liked the way, at least, we got a chapter from Zorian's simulacrum's perspective, which was cool.
And there was a lot of simulacrum content, like just throughout.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think the 2 parts, little tids and bits where we get to see what they're up to and how they think and how they differ slightly.
It was cool. I think the way the first simulacrum we saw reasoned through it is he was like, it would be so hypocritical for me to get mad at the original, because they're like, I technically made that decision too. Like, we were one person when the decision was made. So,
man, it's so weird. It's weird.
I can't get mad at him without getting mad at myself.
I can't really reason out how I would work as a simulacrum. It's just such a weird concept.
God, me neither.
And
I also like that all the way through the end of the story, Zorian's like, my simulacrums are assholes. Like, they just do whatever they want.
So, like, the simulacrum thing, it could have turned a couple of ways. Like, it could have been a really serious plot thread where one of the simulacrums goes rogue and it's like a mini arc, or maybe he even joins Red Robe's side and you have, like, one Zorian in the mix somehow. It didn't go that far, but it went, like, just a tier or two below, where, like, okay, we're using the simulacrums, but they're saying a lot about like Zorian and I don't know his relationship with himself. Because all the simulacrums are like, look, we want the best for Zorian, but we really want to like annoy him as well. We want him to like suffer a little bit, even though we want him to live. So they like balance that out about like doing their task, but doing things that will be inconvenient for him.
Like one of them arranging a date for him, and he's like, "Why the fuck would you do that?" And he's like, "Well, this simulacrum's like, it's your problem now."
Yeah, they did the same thing with Kiriel coming in.
Yeah.
Sauria.
Oh man,
Little
that was
assholes. God, how do we want to go about this? Because there's so much to talk about. Like in part 3, I can go over some of like the bullet points. Like we get a ton of satisfying answers at the start. We get a lot of Zack and Zorian friendship somewhere after
cool.
that.
And God, they're the best. Like Zack and Zorian are kind of like the best friends ever. I kind of love them.
Maybe not the best friends ever.
Not the best, but
a very good friendship in its own way. They do the time dilation stuff. The simulacrum stuff heats up in part 3. We got the Damien expedition arc, which I thought was really good.
that was one of the highlights. I really liked because his brother's been hyped up so long. The whole story, you're just so excited about.
That's what I want to circle back to that one. But I'll just list out some of the other highlights, and then we'll pick and choose our favorites, and then we'll move on to book 4, I think, and talk more about that. That could be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Because we also got the date with Tyvin. We got finally killing that giant spider, and then we like actually team up with Silver Lake and do more Sold stuff. And yeah, like the end you said is like a lot to deal with the Lich. And this was some of the juiciest stuff in the story for me as well.
Dude,
so.
by the way, speaking of the Lich, apparently the author is very active in different communities, like either in the comments on the website where he first posted his chapters or on Reddit. So sometimes I'll be reading through just like Q&As he does, and someone asked like, who was your favorite character in the story to write? And he was like, oh, definitely the Lich. He's like, any interaction with the Lich was just a joy to write.
I had a feeling, and I will say he's one of the best written characters in the story. Like,
He really is.
I can't say like you don't come out of the story like 100% understanding him, but every scene he's in is really well executed. Is what I'll say. So you can tell he put in the special sauce for those.
Like, there's that scene in part 4 where all the main bad guys and all the main good guys are meeting on a rooftop, and Zorian and the Lich are talking, and then the narration is like, the two of them clearly understood more was being said than what they were saying, and then they meet up later.
They immediately like teleport out and back in. It's like, all right,
that part was so good.
They got a cool bond as maybe they're inverse foils of each other a little bit. With I don't know, with all their soul magic, mind magic, tenacity, I guess.
Oh yeah.
But let's talk about the Damien expedition in book 3 because I thought this was really good. Overall, like this might be one of my favorite like sections or arcs of the story. Because I don't know, I really ended up liking Damien. You know how we like Peter in Pact, even though he's kind of an asshole. Damien is no Peter, but he's got that energy going to where like this is just a character I enjoy on screen, and I enjoy him talking and dealing with Zorian.
It's not that every like preconception Zorian had about him was false, because like there are some times where he's a little full of himself, but it was also really interesting to see that Zorian kind of still hasn't realized that a lot of people have more going for them than he gives them credit for. Yeah. Like there was Kiriel was kind of our family member in the first half of the story. That he always loved her because that's his little sister, but I think he really grew to get really close with her in the first half of the story. And Damon, it's begrudgingly at first, but I think Zorian really does get closer with his older brother,
and it culminates in an interesting way too. But just like doing the humbling of Damien, I think, is the real highlight of that section where. And what's cool is like Damien has to realize that Zorian's above him, and that's already like a shakeup. And Zorian can hardly contain like the smugness as he's doing it. Like I particularly remember the teleporter scene where he's like teleporting them across the world, and Damien is just kind of stunned, and that's when it really clicks. But
oh yeah,
there's this undercurrent of like just from Damien's perspective, it's like, and then there's that Zack kid who I don't know much about, but I could tell he's even more dangerous.
Oh yeah.
Oh, we definitely need to talk about a lot of Zack stuff later, but maybe now's not the best time.
One thing that's funny about Damon is like he's a prodigy, right? But now Zorian has, he's elevated himself way above where most mages could ever hope to be. And so they eventually get to the point where they're like, okay, well, like we're gonna have to teach him dimensionalism magic too. Like my older brother's gonna have to learn it, like if we have any hope of doing this. And so they start teaching Damien dimensionalism magic, and Zorian he took him years and plenty of loops to learn it. And he kind of gets pissed because he's like, they don't call him a prodigy for no reason. He picked it up in like one loop.
But it's so cool that like he really lives up to it. Like Zorian's coming in with this information, and is it Damon or Damien? Now I'm confused because I forget how it went.
I think it is Damon.
Right.
But I wouldn't blame someone for going for Damien because they're spelled like exactly the same, but without an I.
I believe the audiobook says Damon. It's just been 2 weeks and I've forgotten all the pronunciations. But it's just cool that he does live up to the hype. He's a very good combat mage as well. He's a pretty good leader. I'm trying to think what I think of like the relationship with his wife, because it seems like she does genuinely like him, but there's also an opportunistic angle from there. But like, it's not played up too much near the end, so it's hardly important, I guess.
Yeah, I think Zorian confronts her about that at one point. About like, okay, obviously I know he's handsome and rich and powerful and stuff, but like I know you love him, but like you're getting something out of marrying him, right? And she's like, you think he's not getting anything out of marrying me? Like, yeah. She's like, I know he loves me, but also it's pretty cool that he's marrying into a royal family, right? So you can't blame me.
Yeah. Oh man, okay. This just makes me think of like a couple of drop balls, but
and God, there are dropped balls, but one thing that wasn't dropped is I'm on my reread right now, and very early on in part 1, someone brings up Zorian's brother for like the half-dozenth time, and he's like, Damon doesn't think about anybody but himself. And I just think to part 4, when we see him give up his life so Zorian can exit the time loop.
Yeah, I mean, no, let's talk about that, because it's such a full circle of like that Damon's gonna stop existing, and it's just like this vague hope that someone can escape and like carry on the will or the knowledge. Like, it's hard to even conceptualize what those final loopers were thinking in their last moments, because it was such like a doomed scenario for them in particular. But he made the sacrifice play, so he clearly cares about his brother. And more importantly, the scene where Damon is like, you never checked up on Fortov is like one of the best scenes in the story, because it's such a comeuppance.
That is such one of the best scenes. Oh my god, it's so good.
It's so good.
It's like, Zorian, you've been in this time loop for like what?
20 years?
Yeah, and you couldn't even spare 1 hour of one of the last days of a time loop to even investigate if your brother lives or dies.
Oh my god, dude,
and
that's crazy.
I'm like, you got his ass, dude.
He did get his ass.
You know what? While that is one of my favorite conversations in the whole book, I'm really pissed because part 1 and 2 were the like, he gets closer to his little sister. That's one of the 3 siblings. Parts 3 and 4 are he gets closer to the oldest sibling. And I kind of expected either in the finale or in the epilogue that he would come around on Fortov, but we just never see that motherfucker again.
It's really upsetting because, okay,
I know.
Say the story is, no, Fortov wasn't worth wasting time on. I just think it's disappointing that he doesn't get any arc. Like, it's their brother, like, bring him along, learn about his character a little bit, and, like, show the reader that, yeah, genuinely there was nothing to really gain here, but it's like a character progression for Zorian. I was like, around the first quarter of book 4, I was like, okay, there's two things I expect for sure. One is like, there's no way Silver Lake's the traitor. That's too obvious. Well, that was wrong as hell. So I'll take the L on that one. But I was like, surely we're gonna get something with Fortov in the end. It's like, nope, I was wrong on both accounts. I was stupid to expect things for these characters.
I know what you mean though, because we don't see Zorian's dad until over halfway through the story, and when we do meet him, he pretty much is as big as an asshole as Zorian made him out to be, and then we never see him again.
That's the other character. Like, we got nothing from the dad either.
But here's the thing, like, we did eventually get to meet the dad in the second half of the story, and he was an asshole, but Fortov didn't get that. Like, I don't know, if Fortov wasn't going to be in the story, I would want it to be something like that, like maybe a changed Zorian comes to him and tries to build a better relationship, and it just doesn't work. If they did that and then Fortov wasn't in the story, I could get it. But we just never, like, there was never a chance.
Wasn't there a thing where, like, Damon did try? Like, not even Zorian, like, Damon tried to reason with him? Or, like, there was, like, a whole thing with them, too. I don't fully remember it.
I think once Damon was in the time loop, I think he did, like, go check on Fortov, or at least talk to him a little bit, but I don't know.
There was something about, like, I don't know, a fight they had. Anyways, it's clearly not that important. What are some other of the bangers in part 3? We talked about the simulacrums, how interesting they are. I really like the time dilations as like an extension of their time in the time loop. I thought that was a really clever way to still have a threatening time limit, but then like artificially expand it so the author could fit in as much story as he needed.
Yeah. Now, was the date with Tyven was probably part 3, right?
Yes, it was. And that was pretty good. That was a good section as well.
Zorian has a lot of bitches, but I really love the Tyven date. I think there was just some kind of chemistry there.
There is, but like I'm surprised that not that much came from it at the end. She got kind of sidelined in part 4, and it's fair because she's not actually like she's relatively strong to him at the start, but compared to like what they're fighting at the end, she's just kind of like a character to kind of worry about even. But like yeah, I expected a little more from that relationship as well. Maybe in Mother of Learning too.
Yeah, if anything, I feel like in the epilogue it was pointing more towards him and his old classmate Akoya, who was like the class rep or whatever.
I felt a little bit of that, and I was like, okay, Akoya's coming back into the fold, I guess. Sure.
Now, one thing that did kind of make me laugh my ass off is we'll talk more about the final battle in the finale later. But one thing that happened when Zack thought Zorian died, he's like, "No, Zorian can't die. There's so many girls who want to get in his pants."
Oh man! Oh Zack Nevada, you magnificent bastard. Let's see. The Silver Lake stuff is more important for later, and let's talk about the Lich scenes because, like, I thought the tension was so palpable when they start actually dealing with the Lich. Like those times where they visit him in the diner and he's wearing like his human costume, as it were, and like he just seems competent and smart, and they're like trading information, and he can tell that something's off, but they're like, hey, it doesn't matter. Next loop, like, it doesn't matter what he does or doesn't tell us. We get to restart this from scratch, but he's still, like, such a tough nut to crack, I feel.
And, God, he has that archetype I love, that lawful evil. If you make a deal with him, you can rest assured knowing that, like, he's not going to break that deal.
Even his motivations were, like, for his country, right? So it's, like, it's interesting that he was not in line with Red Robe and his lofty ambitions. He was more like, okay, I don't want to destroy the world. Like, I need a world to exist so my country can be at a higher standing.
And that's the thing. I really hated all the like world building drops the first time through the story. I've been enjoying them a little bit more the second time through the story. And so, like, for example, the Lich's country that's doing the invasion, like, obviously kids don't invade a city and kill everybody in it. But
yes, kids.
Like, the reason their country was formed is because, like, everybody who practiced the necromantic branch of magic was exiled from that country on principle to a land that wasn't even probably hospitable. So they probably kind of fucking hate this country.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things. I will say, in the overarching like discussion of Mother of Learning as like a story, I do think the world building is like a C minus tier. Like it's there and it's adequate, right? But it's also
Yeah.
in ways lacking for how kind of big the story tries to be. And maybe that's a first time read. I missed a lot of things and didn't connect a lot of things, kind of thing. But even the presentation of the world building is not always the most engaging, which is something we've talked about for forever with this series. To be fair,
I think I would give the world building a C minus too, because there are a lot of things that ended up coming back up. Like, okay, maybe it's important to know about the Splinter Wars or something, because that's how Zack got into the situation he's in. That's how the main villain got into the situation they're in. But at the same time, on this reread, there is a bunch of stuff that just doesn't come back up. Like they talk about some countries that you never hear of again.
yeah, it's probably like a token. Like if I can't just talk about one country or else it's too obvious, kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? And it's there's stuff like the Bakura Gates are introduced really early. You got the rats and the spiders and like the setting, like how they move through the tunnels, like some time is spent on that. Man, they fight like the allies in this story are so weird. You got rats, spiders, and killer wasps. Like it's so goofy. Lizards men. It gets wacky near the end. And the voice actor just loves doing different different race voices. It's
Boy, does
delightful.
he.
Boy, does he. The bee voices just kill me. But like let's transition into Mother of Learning 4 where a lot of these plot threads kind of culminate.
Oh, yes.
I do also have like some key storylines to think about, and we'll circle around to any that are particularly interesting. We got like bringing the others into the time loop, which is huge. We got the banger twist of like the final loop, which was one of the highlights of the series. I definitely want to go back to that. We got the answer to why Zack is brought into the loop, which I thought was really interesting.
Actually, once we learned the reality of what the time loop is, it was kind of cooler than I thought it was going to be.
It was, right? We got the Zorian escape and takeover of his body. We got Zorian's kind of first couple of weeks in the real world, or maybe it wasn't even like weeks, maybe it was like a week or two. But a lot happens in that time. We got the stuff with the angel. We got the preparation that Zorian's doing for like his final gambit near the end, which was cool. We got the final battle itself and some of the politics leading into it as the two groups discuss. We of course got the red robe reveal before that, and then we have like what I consider like Zorian god feats near the end, and then the epilogue. So a lot to cover, and a lot of these points I think we could say a lot about. So is there like, what are you most interested to jump into?
There's actually a note I have for pretty early in part 4.
Yes.
It's kind of the third beat in this 3-beat between Zack and Zorian that was really just chef's kiss. Whenever Zack and Zorian, this is like kind of a 3-beat. I call it the 3-beat of optimism.
Ooh.
Whenever Zack and Zorian first learned about like the parameters of the time loop, like for example, only one person can leave, the very first thing Zack says is like, well, I guess we're just gonna have to find out a way for both of us to leave. And
yeah. Well,
when
meanwhile, Zorian is like the first thing he starts thinking about is like, oh shit, how am I gonna get out of it alone? Kind of. That's where his mind goes to.
And Zorian's first thought when Zack says that is Zack is inspiring. he was like, I can't believe his level of optimism. And it kind of happens again where whenever Silver Lake betrays them, Zack is like, well, now whenever we get out, we have 2 hostile loopers to deal with. And Zorian again looks at Zack and he's like, he thinks we're still going to get out. Like, he's just in awe that Zack could be so optimistic. But then that finally flips on the 3rd beat.
Yes.
Where whenever things go to shit, Silver Lake's already escaped, but then it gets even worse. They learn that this is Zorian's last loop. They thought they were going to have 6 more. Like, no, this is it. And Zack starts freaking out. He's like, this is just it. But Zorian's calm. And he's like, then I guess we'll just have to escape anyway. And it says Zack stammers when he says that. And I kind of like that for once Zorian was like the one who's like, I guess we'll just have to win.
It's almost jarring how little inner monologue there is in that part. Like, Zorian is like you could just feel a flip of zenness switch on where he's uncharacteristically, but like it still makes sense, just calm. It's like the pressure cracks so much that you can understand why he's just suddenly optimistic about it. Because what else can he do? Like he learned this from Zack, and now it's time for him to implement it.
It's like there's only so much planning and preparing you can do. It's probably almost calming knowing that, like, you know what, it'll just be over after this. It won't even be my problem after this because either I'll be out or I'll be dead.
And it's a bummer that I think that only happens because they take all the keys to the gate early, and they're like, "Hey, we were gonna do this anyways," but it's like, damn. That's unfortunate. That
I know
it almost feels a little bit like Zack's fault, even though it's clearly not.
Yeah, but you know,
what else? What else is popping with Part 4?
Now here's one thing I wanted to talk about is the main villain Yornak.
Yeah, I was waiting for this
because we get to the scene on the roof where Zorian hears him say one sentence and he's immediately like, you're not Vez, you're this other guy, which I thought was kind of cool. It kind of felt like a Rinya Goto moment where it's like he's kept track of everything, so based off of one sentence. I thought the idea of the gotcha moment itself was cool. However, I didn't think who the villain was very cool.
That's what I'm thinking, right? Here's how I was just thinking about it. The mystery is mildly entertaining to good. Like the stuff with Fire is like, why is he still running around? Why didn't he kill him, etc., etc.? Why did he leave the loop? I thought that was like fairly engaging. Even I'll admit that I didn't always keep up with like the logic that they were going with, but I just roll with the story. So I'm like, I'll get there at the end. So I was engaged in that, but the actual answer, it's not bad, but it's also it's whelming. Maybe even slightly underwhelming. What do you think?
No, I agree. I really did enjoy the mystery and the gotcha moment of like, oh my god, the bad guy wasn't who he thought it would be. I just think it's lame that the person the bad guy actually was is a character that not only were we not introduced to until like over halfway through the story, even after we were introduced to them, we never really saw them again until that reveal.
That's the thing, right? I don't mind a late game villain reveal, but like it requires a late game villain reveal requires a couple of things, such as like, was there good foreshadowing for it? Do you understand where they're coming from? A recent game I played, I don't want to spoil it, but the villain is like revealed in the last scene, and it's perfect because the entire setting and themes of the story have introduced you to what this villain is like in ways that you didn't really click on until you start talking to him. And I think that's really cool. I did not get that same sense with, God, what is his name? Albernac?
Yornak.
Yornak.
Close enough for as much as he's in the story.
Yeah, and it's like, not only that, the version of him that we meet in the story is completely different from the character that's out the loop and is Red Robe. So it's tricky where it's like, okay, so we really didn't meet you. We met a version of you that had no indication that you'd become how you are. And I think most damning is that he's not interesting when you do.
Like, even his dialogue is...
not great.
His dialogue is just him kind of being bitter.
Yeah, he's just a salty bitch. I do like and we don't get to see much of it, like, that idea that he was Zack's friend and that he went off the deep end. And I think he's most interesting near the end, where you get, like, a lot of his perspective. When does this flashback come in, where he kind of talks about, like, the loops that him, Zack, and like the other temporary loopers at that time? Was that at the end part, or did that come before it? Do you remember?
I think that might have actually come like while they were on the rooftop. I think he was explaining like how he got to this point.
Yeah, I thought that was like fairly good, and then I do think he's most interesting at the very end. But even then, I would say he is not a great main antagonist, especially
not great
for the 100 hours of audiobook buildup.
That's the thing. The time loop was a better villain than this guy.
Yeah, and the primordial, which is I like.
Actually, yeah. Once the primordial learned to talk. Like he was spitting more than this guy was.
He was terrifying too. But like, yeah, I don't know. Red Robe is. Well, you know, do you feel that in the final battle he got his ass kicked a little bit? It's hard to say.
I do think it's really hilarious that he's kind of mortified to figure out that Zorian was the only other time looper in there with him and Zack, because the first time he fought Zorian in part 1 where he killed all the Erenia, he met Zorian and he immediately thought, oh my god, Zack made an entire new league of time loopers that includes the Erenia, and then Zorian killed himself. So he's just like, well, I'm fucked if I stay in the time loop. So he got out. And then he learns that Zorian and Zack went through like 15 more years after that in the time loop. And he's like, holy shit, it was just you? And I left over that?
Oh, you fucking idiot. It's so good. Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, the dragon was a bit of a bigger deal in the final fight, as I recall.
I kind of like the dragon coming back, because I remember early on, Zack, quote unquote, wasted a lot of loops by dying to the dragon over and over trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Because like whenever he killed the dragon back in the time loop, and I just passed that part in the story again, people were like, holy fucking shit, like entire armies, like wizards from all over the world have tried to kill it. So I thought it was kind of cool that the dragon did eventually come back, and I thought the dragon magic was kind of awesome, because it's like, it's not anything super complex, it's just they have so much goddamn mana, they can just cast spells that people wouldn't be able to cast on their own.
And to me, their standout, like, I don't actually remember them casting anything, like, too fancy. Like, their big standout was the hit and run tactics with their speed and mobility. I was like, yeah, that would be kind of, like, really impossible to fight.
Dude, my favorite part was when they cast, like, some just explosive orb, and then, I think Zvim teleported it, in Zorian's words, to another region, and they said it was still bright enough to light up the battlefield like it was the sun.
Jesus Christ.
So I was like, holy shit.
That's so cool. I also remember there's like a section where they're chasing down the dragon, which is
yeah, that was
pretty cool. I'm trying to think of like what were cool Red Robe feats in the final fight, because nothing's really coming to mind, and I'm obviously forgetting something. I'm blanking on some like the cooler like villain feats of the last fight. I remember a lot of the hero stuff.
I will say one thing that apparently he must have had in mind as an ability for Red Robe from very early on is in the final fight, there's a moment where Zorian's sending golems after one of Red Robe's simulacrums, because he's like, oh, there's only so much mana that guy can use, but he's like, oh my god, he's not using mana. For some reason his simulacrum is so fucking strong, it's just punching the golems across the room. And going back through part 1, when he runs into Red Robe's simulacrum, he also shows some of that super strength stuff. So I'm like, I guess it's cool that like he kind of had that in mind as an ability Red Robe had learned that long ago.
And the cool thing was like Zorian focused on like mental magic and like soul magic, like kind of like the more utility stuff, and Zack focused on combat, but wasn't like Red Robe's focus just like knowledge and politics and knowing secrets about the world and how to like gather allies with that blackmail and secrets, and like his big strength to me felt like gathering strong allies that were willing to do what he needed. So a dark Luffy kind of superpower.
Exactly, and you know what? Ultimately, that's kind of why he lost, because you know what? His strength was in those allies, and then they just kind of convince a lot of the allies to abandon him. Like the dragon, they're like, we literally don't need this crown. We'll give it to you if you leave. And it's it's like bet.
And like when Silver Lake goes down, I feel like things crumble so fast for Red Robe. Like
he has no chance.
He's taken out very soon after that, as I recall.
Oh yeah, pretty much immediately.
Which let's talk about Silver Lake. What did you think of her character overall?
I love how much of a bitch she is. It's really entertaining to me, and I find it so satisfying that here's like back in part 2, Silver Lake is pretty much the first new person Zorian meets in part 2. So she comes up pretty early on.
Yeah, we even complained about it back then. It's like, where's this going?
Yeah, and I think at the end of she doesn't appear again in part 2 after that beginning part. And I think in our part 2 talk, I was like, I really hope that Silver Lake and the Grey Hunter thing comes back up because like I don't know, I feel like that was just there. And I find it funny that the first time Zorian ever meets her, she sends him to go kill a Grey Hunter, and he almost dies, and then she ends up dying because Zorian sicked a Grey Hunter after her, which is kind of funny.
I mean that was the very clear poetic justice.
Also, you know what with Silver Lake? We were talking about like how people interact with like Zorian and the Lich, like knowing there are other copies of them.
Yes.
And explicitly, I think during the time loop, it came up that Silver Lake is one kind of person who does not make simulacrums because she knows that they would probably try to kill her and be the only one left. And you know what? She got fucked by another Silver Lake.
Yeah, like the original Silver Lake, she drops like this implication that they tried before and it did not go well. She's like, you know, we don't make clones of ourselves for a reason. So it's like I got the feeling that there's some dark past there, which I thought was interesting as well. There's also some good body horror, as like her body is powered by the immortal. No, that's not what it's called. The
primordial.
The primordial.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she has like some essence in her.
So like, there's the body horror of like Zorian just can't quite kill her. It's just like reforming. I thought that was pretty fun too.
Yeah, and then she ends up getting turned into a skin sack from the spider.
Jesus Christ, she was more entertaining, I think. There was something else I wanted to jump on before we talked about some of the later game stuff. The final loop stuff was very fun. Yeah, let's talk about like the plan, the Angels plan. What are your thoughts? Do you want to summarize for the class and also tell me like what you think of like because it's kind of a dirty thing they did to him, but I don't know how to feel about it.
It did kind of do him dirty, but at the same time, I don't know if they did. And there's a lot of stuff I feel like I'll never know because they very much have that vibe of like they have unknowable plans, and like it's like, did everything go exactly the way they planned or not? Because you know they make the contract like, okay, Zack's gonna go in this time loop, and as long as he figures out how to stop the invasion and no one else finds out about the time loop, he'll be good. But then, of course, obviously, they bring up the idea of, like, maybe they put this contingency about no one else knowing about the time loop because they knew you were going to have to bring people in, and it would be convenient if the only person who knows about it dies at the end of the month.
Yeah.
But then there's also the idea, like, what if the Angels knew he was going to do it, though? What if they knew he was going to eventually make an ally out of Zorian who would allow him to bypass that? I don't know.
I forget what they say, if their like precognition is quite that strong, or if they're going off of like vibes. It's hard to say. I feel like with the Angels.
I feel like anytime Zorian tried to like go down that line of questioning, they just didn't say anything.
Yeah, and whatever their final goal was, I think it worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah, I mean we're alive.
At the end of the day, if I recall correctly, well, at the end of the month, only 2 people know. But he did store some memories for, like, Zvim and Alanis and Damon, right? So they do know at the end of the story that there was a time loop, if I'm not mistaken. But they know it after the expiration date of the contract.
Yeah, I think he explicitly had to go to those, like, 3 people and say, like, hey, I'm going to have to wipe your memories, but I'm going to store a memory packet. Like, it'll be good after the month.
It'll be good. Yeah, and I think the Angel was pretty cool. They're definitely nicer than Pact Angels. I'll give them that.
Also, dude, hey, at least they're looking out for the city.
The tree like form and how it fights during the final fight is a pretty memorable mental image.
Oh my god, I wish I had written it down. There was a sentence I got to when the Angels started fighting, and I was like, this is the longest sentence in the story.
Really?
Like it was one sentence that felt like it was probably a paragraph and a half, and it was just this big long thing about like the Angel's trunks wrapped around this demon and threw it into this monster, which fell down into a fiery ball of smoke, and then the ash. Like I was like, holy! It was just devastating the battlefield, and you know, there's not a lot of times to do a run-on sentence, but I kind of liked it there because it made it feel chaotic as fuck how this Angel was destroying everything.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to break the rules. Man, okay. There's two big Zorian feats I want to talk about because
Let's
like
fucking go.
my like it's probably my favorite part of book 4 are these two particular Zorian things. One of them is his glyphs that he puts around the city, and then the insane mind magic feat that like those glyphs do, where they, if I understood it correctly, they suddenly like corral the entire city to fight back the invasion with really the way it's described, it feels like really subtle, really well implemented mind magic.
Yeah, like he's not mind controlling them per se, but like for example, he has a glyph over here telling him that a bunch of winter wolves are moving to this district, and he can just look at this other glyph and be like, oh, all of these people who can fight, go fight the wolves. All these other people will evacuate to this district, which doesn't have any hostile minds in it.
But
like,
he is sending
he's
like
RTSing the city.
He is sending like suggestions to the people, like a dude who doesn't know how to fight picked up a sword and protected like a family from a demon kind of thing.
He turned the city into an RTS.
It's really cool. Man, and I was already in awe of that. But then the triple I win chapter, that shit was crazy.
I'm getting goosebumps right now. I never saw that shit coming.
That was so good. I win part 1, 2, and 3 is peak mother.
Because like we got to Zack's chapter and I was like, holy shit, Zorian's dead. Like I genuinely believed it.
Oh hell no! As soon as like wait, no, yeah, because Zack comes first, right?
Yeah. They got my ass.
They sort of got my ass, but I was like, why is this called part 1? There's something up. Like, I didn't think he was dead, but he, like, faked his own death. But then you get to part 2, where it's about, oh god, I've already, Yornak. And that was really good. And then you get the true I win.
Zorian put him into a new time loop of Zorian's design.
It's so twisted that the time looper puts the two other time loopers in a time loop.
Holy shit. And it's also... Or you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
One thing I really loved about this technique he does is that even Zack, for a moment, is like, what if this is some fucking trick that Zorian's doing? And he starts reading minds of people around him, and he's like, no one is good enough to make fake minds. And then we get to Zorian's chapter, and he's like, Zack's totally right. These aren't fake minds.
What did he do again with the fake minds? He had the Aranea help, right? So
he has the glyphs all around the city, right? So in this mental fake city that Zack is walking around in, Zack will walk up to someone and try to read their mind. Zorian will just, like, port the real mind from the real body over to Zack and then send it to him. So Zack is reading the real person's mind.
It's so like it's interesting, right? There is a almost steadfast rule. There's not many like hard rules in this story, but one of them sort of is that mind blank is the defense, you know. Yeah. So how do you feel about like Zorian's final feat basically being able to penetrate the mind blank of Zack and Yornak? Yeah. I kind of like it, I think, even though it's like breaking like the steadfast rule. I feel like that's something that was well earned. It's a well earned rule break.
I think it is very well earned. I liked it too, because that thought had kind of been floating in my head about potentially not liking it ever since they brought the others into the time loop, and then Zorian pulls his brothers Vim and not Spear of Resolve, one of the other Aranea over, and he's like, look, I need to learn how to get past Mind Blank. And all three of them immediately know, like, okay, Zack's always under Mind Blank. But they agree to help him anyway, and that's the last we hear about it until, like, Win Part 3.
And it's cool because they even say, like, Zorian, what you're doing is a first in the history. Like, it felt like a monumental thing. And it's cool because Zorian's always wished that he made some big innovation to magic. Like, it wasn't like his deepest desire, but when he thinks about his future, it's a end goal that he would like to achieve, and he does it.
Yeah, and I think the skill itself, he named it, like, Manifold Resonance. And what I like about it, the reason it feels earned, is because I don't think it breaks the rule that was set up. Because the rule with Mind Blank is your mind is completely disconnected from whatever the Great Web is. Like, you cannot connect to it, full stop. There's no amount of stronger mind magic that can bypass Mind Blank. But what's cool about it is what he does not bypass the Mind Blank. What he realizes is your mind is a product of your body, which obviously has your brain, and your soul, which has like your consciousness. Like your body and your soul interacting together are what connects to and makes up your mind. So that's the avenue he goes through. I think he like attacks the body and soul, which drops the mind defense, and then he's like, okay, now I'm in.
That is, but like, okay, now I need to go reread because like, how does he attack the body and soul exactly? Because that implies that he's doing mind magic to attack the body and soul. But if you can't, but with Mind Blade, that's a little difficult. So
I think the answer to that is the Soul Caesar chrysanthemum.
Right, the flower.
It was a flower, and the reason he realized this would affect Mind Blank goes back to part 3.
Yeah.
When they were adventuring in Koth with Zack and everybody, the whole group trying to find the orb.
Did we almost die to a flower?
That's the thing. They almost died to a flower, but it dropped Zack's guard because it just passively attacks the soul of everyone around it. And I think that stuck with Zorian. He's like, wait a fuck.
That's so good, though, because that's one of those misadventures they get into where it's like, will this come back? And I do like how it wraps back around. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, a lot of stuff wraps back around. Some of it more obvious than others. Yeah. One thing that was obviously just a little Easter egg. Once Zorian gets back into the real world, he bumps into this guy on the train to Scioria, and he's like, huh, that motherfucker looks familiar. And it turns out that guy was someone Zorian met on the train that caused his first ever deviation in the time loop. Because the first 5 loops, Zorian went to class as normal. But then he eventually bumped into that guy who was like, oh, I bet you'd like working in the library.
Right, the library dude, which is how he met Elsa, I believe.
Yeah, and so he just bumps into that guy again, like over 100 chapters later, and he's like, God, I know that guy from somewhere.
Yeah, I bet you do. You know, about the turning back, like, we spent a lot of time, like, I don't know if we needed the thing with the shifter's brother getting kidnapped, for example. Like, how do you feel about that plot thread?
Or was it like the cat shifter mom and her little sister, or no, her daughter?
Yeah, the daughter had to, like, the divination thing they do with, like, the daughter, or no.
God, no, I know what you mean. Once they get back into the real world,
right? Yeah. No, sorry, yeah.
I was thinking something different. When they get back into the real world, one of his classmates, Rainy, who is a wolf shifter, has her brother kidnapped. I did think, if you're talking about, you mentioned earlier, like, I feel like there was one part of part 4 that dragged on longer.
That's what it was, I think. Yeah,
that's what it was. I kind of didn't get why they were making such a big deal about it.
And what did it even accomplish? Because the idea was we need to stop the soul bombs because the kidnapped people are being used to power up the soul, like, wraith bombs or whatever. But what's his face had, like, contingencies anyway, so, like, it felt like hey, we need to do this because we don't know the contingencies, but the story is spending so much time doing it that it may not feel worth it at the end.
And now, I know the reasoning for making a big deal about it was, like, oh, if we find where they stashed all the shifter children, then they're not going to be able to free the primordial anyway. Yeah. And so I'm like, maybe that's why they would make a big deal about it. But even Zorian shoots that down. He's like, even if we rescue them, they probably just have like 30 other stashes of shifter children.
Yeah. Either way, aside from that, I did really like all the time that Zorian spends with the people out of the loop, where it's like, he's especially, like, it happened with Elsa, where it's really melancholy, where it's like, I kind of became a genuine friend with you over the last 6 months, and, like, even beyond that, but, like, we worked together. I was honest about the time loop, and we were genuine friends. So it's kind of weird having to deal with you in a context that's not that. And he thinks about if his relationship will ever be the same with all these people that he got to know better, which is just interesting to think that, like, loner, like, not necessarily loner, but antisocial Zorian from the start is, like, he's never aware enough to realize how far he's come, which is an interesting narrative, like, technique by the author, where he, like, he's very subtle about it, but just thinking that original Zorian would come to have these complex emotions over his relationship with the people in the time loop shows a lot of growth, which I thought was pretty good.
It sneaks up on Zorian, and it sneaks up on the reader too. I think, obviously, like, there's things this author does really well and things he does not so well. Like, I mean, we've clowned on the world building before, but I think that is something he does superbly well, is the subtle character arc of Zorian. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and it's something that I bet on a potential reread would hit even more.
Dude, that's the thing. Like, when you go back to Arc 1, Zorian's kind of an ass.
He was always an ass. You just kind of forget a little bit.
You just forget, but shit, dude.
Okay, there's one topic we can maybe even like. There's a big topic I want to close on, and it's Zack and Zorian as characters. But is there anything you want to squeeze in before we do like a Zack and Zorian closer?
Because that's the thing. Like, the last big thing I want to do is like a deep dive on like their characters and what they stand for.
Yeah.
As kind of like a just for fun bonus.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, I told Willer I've been reading. I didn't know these existed. I think they've only existed since the audiobooks came out. I think he releases like one, I think he released one with each audiobook. So the author wrote what he calls the AU chapters, which are just like ideas for what if the time loop turned out this way, or what if this event happened differently, alternate universe.
Yeah.
The way he advertises these alternate chapters is like, what if Zorian got real training from the Lich, or what if he decided to
that's an interesting one.
Or like, what if he decided to exit the time loop like he did, but only after storing the Imperial orb with a bunch of people and goodies and stuff like that. Now, neither of those two are any of the actual AU chapters he wrote. The ones he actually wrote, I think, are kind of cooler. So the first AU chapter is probably less cool, but it's kind of funny. So the alternate chapter starts from chapter 4 in an alternate version of the story. So, like, this chapter is called Chapter 4B.
Chapter 4 or Part 4?
Yeah, it's like...
Sorry, Chapter 4 or Part 4? Like,
Oh, no, it's like Chapter 4, Part B.
Okay.
So, like, if he had written a different story, like, this would have been Chapter 4 or something. But it is Arc 1.
Okay, Arc 1, Chapter 4. Okay.
There you go. And the way it works is, like, it's mostly the same, except Akuya is, like, way more clingy with Zorian.
Okay.
And at the end, when that fateful attack happens and Zorian gets hit by the Lich and brought into the time loop, she also gets brought in. Which Zorian kind of hates. Because, like, the next morning she comes up to him in class and she's like, Zorian, please tell me I'm not crazy. And he immediately knows what she's talking about. He's like, you're not crazy. And she's like, Zorian, like, we have to tell people. And so she immediately, like, she's like, Zorian, we have to go tell everybody. And he's like, no, I'm worried that, like, what if the invaders have important people high up in the city or in the police? They could kill us, which is something that happens when Zorian tries it in the original story. So he tells her that's a bad idea, and she's like, okay, well, full disclosure, I kind of already did that. And also I did all this other stuff, and I think the chapter just ends with him like, I really wish someone else got hit by that spell at the same time as me.
What I like about that idea is I think, like, Akuya's character growth would be even more apparent than Zorian's would be.
Yeah.
I think it would be really interesting to see how she could develop from that.
I think she's ripe for development. So we have another one. I'm trying to remember what this one was. So there's one where, oh no, this one was so sad. Dude, this was actually depressing. So in this chapter, it's called Chapter 1B. The premise of this is that whenever Zack and Zorian successfully escape the time loop, get into the real world, and stop the invasion, and finally make it to the end of the month, every time that happens, they are reverted back to Zorian's first loop in the time loop.
How? What's the mechanism here?
And basically the point of this chapter is Zorian not just trying to figure that out, but also trying to, like, wrestle with the existentialism of, like, do I just give up? Do I just die? And what's really sad is,
so they go through the 20 years or whatever, get out, stop the invasion, and have to do another 20 years?
Well, kinda. So, like, it goes back to Zorian's first loop. But here's the thing. If they escape the loop into the real world and succeed in all that, they loop back and keep their memories. So what happened in this universe is, like, the main story happened, all 100 plus chapters, and then at the very end, instead of the epilogue, it looped back to Zorian's first loop. But Zorian and Zack still had their memories. So they have the
full time now, but with all the memories.
Yeah, so they just kind of did the same shit again. They just kind of immediately escaped the time loop again and were successful. And then they looped back, and then they're back in the time loop. And so it takes them a few loops of tries because they don't get it right every time. Sometimes they mess up and they escape again and again and again, and they escape like a dozen times. And so eventually it gets to this point where Zorian. It's also really sad. Zorian runs into his mom and his sister at the beginning of this loop, but he doesn't talk to them. He just kind of like telekinetically makes them go to sleep. Which it's kind of gross. Like, obviously he would never hurt them, but
we've always considered this kind of dark path for Zorian, though, as an option.
Yeah, like he's just kind of over it, and he ends up talking to a version of Zack that doesn't remember any of the time loop. Well, this Zack remembers his own time loop, but not that they ever escaped it.
Is that how it always is, or is it just like a weird case?
So basically, if they escape the time loop and stop the invasion, but like one of them dies, for example, before they get looped back, they don't keep their memories. And so the previous Zack had escaped with Zorian about a dozen times before he decided, I'm not going to do this shit anymore. He's like, I spent decades in that time loop and I escaped it, and now I'm looping the time loop. And he's like, I don't think I can do it anymore. And so he elected not to loop. And so Zorian is talking to a new version of Zack, and Zorian shows him all of his skills and all the things he's doing. And Zorian tells him about this like second layer to the time loop. And Zack is like, Zorian, I am not like that other Zack. I will never give up on you. He's like, you are my like. He's like, whatever it takes. He's like, I've been stuck in this time loop for a long time. I know how it feels. I know how you feel. I will never give up on you. 100 tries, 1,000 tries. And Zorian smiles at him and gets back to work. But then behind that smile, he's like, that's literally exactly what the last Zack said.
Oh, wow, okay. That's a doozy. And, like, I'm guessing in this scenario, Zorian can give Zack, like, a memory packet of... In case he doesn't make it, like, I'm sure they could do some memory packet bullshit, but...
Yeah.
Probably elects not to and just...
So,
wow.
That one was pretty intense. It was pretty sad.
Damn. Interesting.
The next one is not as crazy. It's just... A lot of fans had always been asking the author, like, we always thought Zorian was going to end up doing something like a shifter ritual, because there was a big deal about shifters or making potions that temporarily give you the ability to be some magical creatures. And we were always like, a lot of fans thought Zorian was eventually going to become a Grey Hunter shifter. And he shows us a chapter of that. And Zorian's still a good guy. He's just kind of off. Like, he acts a little bit more robotic, which if it's possible for Zorian to act more robotic, imagine it.
Jeez.
But he kind of freaks people out in that he has like cravings for raw meat, for example, I think.
Oh, no.
But then we do get a scene of him and Zack going down into the dungeon, and Zorian activates Grey Hunter powers, and he's like bounding off the walls, and he jumps off a wall and kicks a troll in the neck so hard it breaks its neck and stuff like that.
Damn.
So it was kind of cool, but I think it was one of the shortest.
Feels very like packed othery, like that level of losing your humanity and becoming something else.
Like both his sister and his classmates and Zack all still associate with him, but all of them kind of express like, I don't think this affected your personality in a good way. And Zorian's like, I feel better than ever. And we're like, we know you do.
And the shifter ritual would carry 12 loops, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like it was interesting because I think what that shifter storyline built up to was the like warping toad or whatever, like blood that he kind of put into himself near the end of the loops, if I remember correctly, which isn't quite shifter, but like it was the result of his experiments.
And then the final one, no, this is definitely the shortest of the chapters. Very early on in the story, we learn about the dungeon and how the deeper you go, the more dangerous it gets. No one has ever been to the bottom. Even the most powerful archmages, if they go down far enough, will run into trouble. So this chapter is just about one particular loop where Zack and Zorian decided, you know what? This is the loop. We're just going to take the month off from everything else. How deep can we actually get in the dungeon?
Oh, it's the roguelike run.
Yeah, they're like, we're just gonna go down until we get to the bottom or we die. And eventually they get to a depth where they run into a monster that the two of them together cannot defeat, and then another monster shows up and scares that monster off.
Yep.
And then
classic.
they both look at each other and they're like, nah, let's get the fuck up out of here.
Ah, bummer. Okay, I want to know what's at the bottom.
No, they're like, nah, we can't do this shit.
Well, I guess we'll never know.
But those are the fun AU chapters. But let's talk about the really fun stuff.
Let's. Where do we want to start with the lads?
Hold on, I'm pulling up my alternate notes.
Oh yeah, these are the we've talked 59 minutes about the fake notes. These are the real notes. Yeah, like Zack and Zorian's dynamic carries the story basically. Like that and the intrigue of the time loop. Obviously, like I think the premise is very interesting, and they do execute on the looping aspect really well. But I think the heart and the character of the story really is Zack and Zorian, the two Z bros.
Yeah, so I have a really fun kind of line of character development I want to go down with Zorian. And it's a thread because I tried to read this story once before, like many, many years ago.
I remember that, yeah, because you talked about this on the a early podcast, and I at the time I thought you had finished it, but you had just finished part 1, which is crazy.
Yeah, it was like years ago when like we had just started doing this shit, and like I had tried to read a little bit of Mother of Learning, but at the time I was reading it, I think I don't even think it was like half done. So I was like, I'll just wait until the story's done and I'll do the whole thing. And then luckily we ended up getting a pretty good audiobook of it. So, but even back then, of the few, like I say few, I probably read like 30 something chapters. Out of all the chapters I read, one line that characterizes Zorian really stuck with me all those years until I ended up reading it again. And I think we get really good payoff on this line. And that line is, after Zorian experiences his first ever loop, when he learns about the invasion and he decides he has to save everyone, we get this line, and it says, Zorian was not a fundamentally selfless person, and he wasn't going to save people only if it meant screwing himself over in the end.
Yeah.
And I think as the story goes on, and especially in part 4 when he has to like confront his own mortality, I think we get more and more of these beats of like, what will Zorian do to survive? And it gets really intense in some moments, because Zorian has to witness a lot of people sacrifice themselves for him. He even remarks during the escape from the time loop,
and the invasion too. He remarks on like just his numbness to the death, and he's like, I'm gonna have to think about this later.
There's numbness to death, but he's also very in awe of specifically Zvim and Damon sacrificing themselves for him. He's like, their chance to get out of the time loop is right there. And with them being time loopers, that is their only chance to live. And they are giving that up to save me. And he lingers on that thought for a very long time while the path to the time loop exit is open. I think it's something he thinks about very often. And
it's like, I get the feeling it's something that's in the back of his mind, and it's something that doesn't make it to text, but you can kind of feel that it's there.
Yeah, and like he contemplates it even further, where it gets, whenever they learn about Zack's angel contract, it becomes kind of a question of, would Zorian have to die for Zack to live? Obviously, that's not what ends up happening, but he really thinks about it for a second. He has a moment of introspection where he's like, Zack has resolved himself to die for me already. He's like, Zack knows he is going to die at the end of this month because I know about the time loop. And it's like, sure, we could wipe away all my memories, but he's like, to me, the time loop is me. He's like, I've spent more time in the time loop than I spent out of it. Erasing all of that is kind of effectively killing me.
Yeah.
But he's like, Zack would do that for me. And even after Zack has that resolve, Zorian doesn't really go there. He's like, I don't want to do that. He's like, he doesn't want to die. And God, like, there's even more moments with this where they philosophize a lot about what they're going to do when they get out of the time loop. He talks about it with Tywin and Kyle, where he's like, You know, some of them are like, I just don't think I could do that to my other self. And Zorian kind of dodges around it. But when it gets to the moment and he escapes the time loop, Zorian is a Zorian has a lot of internal narration. Like, he thinks a lot, and we see all of it. He thinks very little when killing his original self and
Yeah,
taking
it
that
is
body.
okay. It is a robotic, like it happens so fast that you're like, oh god, okay, I guess we're moving on. Like my notes, because I was driving at the time, I pulled up like my voice app and I was like, well, okay, he just did that. He just killed the body, and like that's all I could like muster to say. It was just shocking to me.
And
Or he just killed
you
the
know,
soul.
he like normally Zorian's the type of person who will explain in multiple paragraphs why he does everything before he does it, and he didn't do that here. And I was sitting there thinking, like, what the fuck? Like, why would you not talk about that? And I realized why later in the chapter. Zack brings it up, and Zack asks Zorian, what did you do to your old self? Like, how did you get around that? And Zorian actually gets upset.
Yeah.
Zorian does not want to talk about it, and I think that's kind of why.
It's actually like one of the only times I can think about is him voicing. It's like, dude, I really don't want to talk about this right now. Like, it's the only time he kind of voices real emotional turmoil to Zack out loud.
And I think so. All that is to say, I think a big deal about Zorian is he doesn't want to die, and obviously no one wants to die. But I think it is a very present fear on his mind throughout the story, and I think it affects a lot of what he does. We see people sacrifice themselves for Zorian, which really affects him, and I think why this is significant is in how he differs from the main villain, who, much like Zorian, would go to any lengths to avoid dying. But here's the distinction between the main villain and Zorian. And I think there's also a cool parallel between Zack and the main villain we'll get to. Zorian would do anything to avoid dying, and he does, except abandoning his morals. Like, he's not gonna kill all these people if it means getting to live.
And it's crazy. It's such a razor thin line because in part three, Alanis and Zvim are mostly Zvim are like, hey, dude, you should start like really fucking people up if you want to get out of here. And it just like for such an antisocial boy with like. I could see him going slight school shootery vibes, and he just never did. He continuously surprised me at his resilience to truly get down in the muck. And in some ways, you could see that that as like a missed opportunity or the story being too soft. But he really kind of wraps around it to just being like a very interesting duality of Zorian, someone who has insane survival instinct, but someone who will not bend to a certain level of like he won't go like as low as possible to survive, but anything above that line he will explore every option, I feel.
Which is so cool because both Yornak and Silver Lake were kind of in the same position as Zorian, but they were both given an earlier out than Zorian that would have required them to sacrifice a shitload of people. And they said yes, because they're like, yeah, my survival is way more important than literally everyone else's. And that's what sets the villains apart from Zorian, is Zorian had that same choice with the Primordial, and he just didn't take it.
And for all the ruminating on people dying for Zorian, it's interesting that he almost never internalizes the idea that he'll die for someone else. Like, isn't that like his and like maybe that level of selfishness could be shown in the simulacrums where like we're gonna annoy you, but we'll die for you, aka die for us, but we won't die for anything else. Instead, we're going to like push the boundaries of what is magic to find an alternate solution.
And man, you know, a hope I had for the story, it didn't end up happening, but I'm not counting that against the story because
Yeah.
maybe that's just not what the author was going for. What I really hoped was going to happen, that line that always stuck with me, that Zorian was not selfless and he wasn't going to save people if it meant screwing himself over in the end. Whenever we got to that chapter where it appeared that Zorian got annihilated to save Zack, a part of me was like, Zorian, you bastard, you did it.
You did it, but
You did
no.
But never mind. We still got something
but
pretty
like
cool.
you said, this isn't like there's the hope that like the there's two kinds of hopes, right? One where it's like the story was lacking, and if this had happened like it was set up to, I would have liked it a little better. And then there's the hope where it's like, this is kind of my head canon for what the story will be, but it's okay if it doesn't happen because I'm interested in whatever the author has to tell. Usually, a lot of my hopes end up on that more positive side where it's like whatever happens happens, but everyone has those things where it's like the story would have been better if this little thing happened, and it just varies how much that's going to ruin it for you. But that one is definitely like, I could have seen Zorian do a sacrifice play, or the alternate where like Zorian finally caves in and sacrifices Zack. I think both of those were viable ways to take it, but I'm happy with what we got as well in that.
That's the thing. Like what we got is still really good.
Yeah.
So I'm not counting it against it.
Yeah,
so what do you think about these characters?
You've said a lot of the things I want to say about Zorian, especially the self-sacrifice.
It's that survival instinct, man.
With Zorian, I guess it's like not really a Zorian thing. I'm surprised Kiriel never died. Like, did she die in a single loop?
I don't think Kiriel dies in a single loop.
I was like, she has to die because I need to see what's gonna happen to this kid when she does. But I guess we'll never know.
Because if she's not with Zorian, I think she goes with the parents. And any time she ever goes with Zorian, I think she is with him at the end of the loop.
Yeah, or like Zorian dies and she's just
or
some
shit like that.
But anyways, yeah, like Zorian's, we've talked about how his progression is very light, or like not very light, but very understated. It's very interesting, and yeah, like you said it best. It's just so interesting. He never really says, "What if I sacrifice myself for Zack?" Like I think it comes up very briefly, but he immediately goes into like either Zack's gonna die or I have to find a solution that saves us both.
This thing, it does come up briefly, and that the one time it does come up briefly was such a memorable moment for me. It was really just that moment of they learn about the contract, and Zorian is like, Zack has made up his mind to die for me. Could I do that in return?
Moving on, though, to the second Star Child.
Yes.
I do have a question before we get into Zack. Who's your favorite character in Mother of Learning?
Man. Okay, my favorite character is Zorian, but like the closest of close second places are probably Zack and then the Lich.
So for me, it's Zack, and you know what? That's a good top three, right? Because I would go Zack, Zorian, Lich. So I'm glad that we could both agree that.
God, Zack is so good though.
Zack is so good though. Like to me, like because Zorian is such a like kind of a downer kid. Zack brings so much levity to the story, and like I think I said this in part 2, it's like the story truly kicks off when Zack comes into the picture, and
that really is.
Because now there's like a dynamic. There's someone there to bounce off of Zorian's dreariness and like antisocialness and like his overly seriousness, right? We have a much lighter character with a lot more vivacious of a personality. He likes getting drinks. He likes hitting on women. He likes the idea of a pet Hydra. He's a very good battle mage. And like Zack is such a cool, like hyped up character where he's got that like hidden One Piece character vibe or the old mentor vibe where it's like we never see Zack go all out, I think. Like never go fully all out.
I don't think we do, man. Like the only time he ever like has to crack his knuckles is against the Lich. But even then he has help with Zorian.
Exactly, like I never feel like Zack did his ultimate technique, so to say. But he does so many like weird cool things. But like it's the caring for Zorian. A lot of it shows when he thinks Zorian's dead and when he's woken up by Zorian after they get out of the real world, and he's talking to Zorian, and like they're talking about the idea of him killing the other Zorian. Like there's just the complex emotions, and them have like I think Zorian has to carry Zack. Just like these subtle bonding moments where like Zorian doesn't say it in his mind, but you are the closest friend he's ever had by a ton.
That's the thing. He never says it, but there was a distinct moment that really made me laugh. Not laugh, but just like I really smiled because when Zorian and Zack first team up, Zorian thinks Zack is annoying like he thinks everyone is annoying.
Yeah.
There's an interaction they have in part 4 where I don't know if they were fighting some monster or trying to do some task, but Zorian like kind of messed up a spell and Zack clowned on him. And then specifically the text said, "Shut up," Zorian said, without a bit of callousness in his voice. And I'm like,
Oh.
I feel like they are just really that close to each other because anyone else in the story, if Zorian says shut up, I feel like he means it.
Yeah, like it is peak show don't or yeah, show don't tell with just how much Zorian cares about Zack. It's so sweet, and like I when I'm talking about Zack here, it loops around to me talking about Zorian a lot. But honestly, it's because Zorian would not be half the character he is if not for Zack's influence and Zack kind of carrying the story on his shoulders. Like it's a very Sam and Frodo kind of vibe, where Zack is the unsung hero of the story to me.
And that's the thing. They really help each other grow a lot, not only in personality, but even just for practical reasons. Because you know, back early in part one, whenever Zack thinks Zorian's a time traveler, but he's not sure, Zack is telling him about the time loop, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I never really went back to the library after the first time." And Zorian's like, "Oh my god, you're such an idiot! You never went back to the library." But then later in the story, once he sees all the spells Zack has, he's like, none of these spells would be in a library because they're all so illegal. but he's like, it's good that Zack knows them.
They're so like, oh man, they complement each other so well in their skill sets too, and like, just the idea that like everyone's scared of Zorian, but then Zack is just even more terrifying in a very different way. Like they're both terrifying at not different ends of the spectrum, but they like went down different parts of the skill tree, and they're both like at the peak, and it's just so cool to see people interact with the two. And yeah, like Zack ends up being like kind of the main character as well, as far as like the grand scheme of the plot, and I think that's really interesting as well. Even though Zorian's the one that pulls out like the ultimate coup de grace that saves them both. Um, so yeah, like it's hard to not love Zack as my favorite because any scene that he's on the screen, I also just like his personality. I think it's well written. He's a good laid back character that doesn't come off as like he doesn't come off as too stupid, um, or too unserious. Like he's clearly got a lot on his mind, and yeah, like it just works. He's well written and really saves the story from being too monotonous. Because imagine a story without Zack and Zorian is just always in control, and the most that he ever has to an equal is people he either tells about the time loop or brings in as a temporary marker. Like he needed his true equal to really bounce off like not only like story progression but also the character. Like it's a true equal in both senses in my opinion. It's a proper I never know how to say the word deuteragonist, the double protagonist kind of thing.
And it's kept interesting where Zorian has this new super powerful ally, but what keeps him in the realm of 99% ally instead of 100% is that nebulous Zack's always under mind blank.
Yeah, oh it's so good.
Like that's such a good thread to keep going in the background. And god, like you're right, he really does become like a co-main character in a different sense that the other quote-unquote loopers do, like Zvim. Like when I came back to part one to listen to it again and Zack talked, I was like, oh my god, it's Zack. And then now I'm in part two and I'm like, holy shit, there's like a whole main character missing.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's, you know, a good comparison, I think, is Sora and Riku, where if you actually kind of follow the story of Kingdom Hearts, Riku's kind of like the actual special boy main character in a great sense. And also, but like, Sora is the one that kind of takes the reins and does the actual big events, but they kind of switch the personalities of that. But it's like that vibe of like they complete each other in a way, so it's pretty cute.
It's so perfect.
And yeah, like it would have been very cool to get a sequence where Zorian does dive into the mind of his best friend above like just kind of like keeping him in the loop until the month is over. Like it would have been cool to have like an emotional like what is Zack's deepest fears, like let's pry into him a little bit out of necessity. Would have been cool.
Because man, like Zack had like as much time in the time loop without Zorian as Zorian had in the time loop total.
Which is just crazy. This is an old man.
There's a whole world of shit that he went through that we'll just never know.
He had a whole group of like other time looper friends. That's crazy.
Which is nuts.
I can't picture Zack working with other people without Zorian there to like mediate. You know, it's crazy.
It wasn't the same. Whatever situation they had going on, it wasn't the same.
Damn.
What's really funny is one thing I noticed whenever Zack and Zorian first started adventuring together, I kind of got the vibe that Zack was just kind of letting Zorian do what he wanted and following around because I don't know, maybe he'd run out of ideas after all this time. And Zack totally confirms that in part 4.
Yeah.
I think after Yornak, gives the whole history about him and Zack, later Zack is talking to Zorian and he's like, yeah, I mean, after we joined up in the time loop, I just kind of let him have the reins and I would just kind of follow him around and see what he would do. But he's like, it's because he thinks so differently from me. He's like, he tries stuff I would never try, so might as well just follow him around, let him try his ideas, and give him the muscle he needs to do them.
But it's that willingness of teamwork. Like, Zack is so open to teamwork, while these two other characters are not really.
Which is crazy. He's open to teamwork, and Zorian wasn't. That's the thing. Zorian spent years in the time loop avoiding Red Robe, who wasn't even there because he was terrified. He was so paranoid, and people call him paranoid throughout the entire story. Multiple people do, including Zack.
And it works out to his credit, but
it does work out. But man, if he wasn't so paranoid, think of God, how well some of this shit could have gone.
It could have gone a lot easier. You said you had an interesting parallel between Zack and Red Robe.
I do, and you know what? I'm gonna say it. In part 1, one of the things I kind of didn't like about the fight between Zorian and Red Robe was Zorian pulling out the gun and shooting him.
Yeah.
I like the gun now.
Yeah, let's go. Because I like what Red Robe says about the gun. It's like, I can't believe you did that, by the way.
Yeah, and God, he's like, what kind of mage would use a gun? And this ties into what sets Red Robe and Zack apart. The reason that gunshot was so fucking insulting to Red Robe in part 1 is because guns are the reason his life is shit. The Splinter Wars were this big mage war, but everyone expected the countries that had way longer lineages of mages to win, which was the lineages that Zack and Yornak were from. But what happened during those wars is the countries that invested into firearms ended up kind of just massacring everybody else. Mm-hmm. The reason Zack and Yornak lost their houses, all of their loved ones have nothing left, is because guns devastated their ancient mage lineages.
That's kind of crazy.
So Zorian getting the edge over him in a fight using a handgun is such a slap in the face to him. So I kind of like it more. Obviously, there's no way you
perfect.
You can't know all of that in part 1.
Yeah.
So I stand by what I said back then.
Yeah, it's not a good first impression necessarily.
But then going back to Zack and Yornak are in that same position where their houses were taken from them, both because of the wars, but also just because bureaucracy stole everything from them in the aftermath. But Zack's not gonna murder the whole fucking country over that.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty big jump for Yornak to do.
Yeah, I'm pissed about it. You don't have to kill everybody.
Jesus Christ, that motherfucker. You know, Bradley, I think that's good for Mother of Learning for now.
It was pretty good. It was a pretty damn good book. I think the last time we gave it a rating, personally, I think we said it's a really good 7.5. I might still keep it around 7.5 or an 8 because I'm not gonna act like it's the best fucking book ever written, but it was very entertaining. I'm glad I finished it.
In my 5-star rating that I like to go to because I get more comfortable using the whole rating, I think a 3.5 or somewhere between 3.5, probably 3.5 after I talk to you every time I'm like, this story is better than I give it credit for by half a star. So I'm feeling like a 3.5, but I want to stress that we were just saying it the other day. It's this could end as the most mid shit, but I still get a lot of joy just by going through it. It's just a breezy time, even if it's a little long. It's never not engaging for too long. It's just a good vibe. It's a good vibe story.
It was fun to go through, and I gotta say, I wasn't gonna say this, but I found some other people who kind of had the same experience as me when I was. Anytime I finish any show or story or video game, I gotta look at all the memes. I gotta look at all the reviews. I gotta spend 3 days listening to every thought anybody's ever had about this work of art. And
I need to do that. Actually, I need to go watch the reviews at the very least.
And I found a couple other people who had the same experience as me, where the story can be a little bit inspiring when you're trying to build a skill, because I first started reading this book whenever I started learning how to bind books.
Oh yeah.
And I found out that this book is considered to be in a subgenre called like progression fiction, which is just like specifically for stories about the protagonist starts from nothing and becomes like a god by the end.
Yes.
And I don't know, seeing Zorian build skills was kind of a fun ride along as I was building like my own skills for something in real life.
And when you think about it, like a core theme of this story is like perseverance and keeping at it and building blocks. It's a very building block kind of story. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, very building blocks. Like the only way to get better is to just do it. So it was kind of a fun little companion. So
that's awesome.
Good ass book. It's a gab.
It's a gab. Certified gab moment. And if you're listening to this, thanks for watching. If you haven't checked out the other parts, I think both of our other discussions were also very fun for us to do. So it's probably decently fun to listen to if you like this. And thanks for joining me, Bradley. Oh, we need to find another book or manga to do a book talk with, because I think they're really fun.
Yeah, thanks for reading with me. For our next one, let's not do another web serial, because goddamn.
Yeah, let's do something that's reasonable length.
We need to do a normal ass book that's not the size of 10 books.
That would be delightful. Because it helps that Zelda came out, so I'm able to read a lot more. But I'm almost done. I finished this book like a week ago or a week and a half ago, and I'm almost done with my next book. That was like a 20-hour book. That's just like the difference. That it can go with dealing with like 4 25-hour books versus 120.
See, you're the one who finally got me on listening to audiobooks at like 1.5 speed.
Oh, you gotta. It's mandatory.
Oh my god. In this book, like I listened to almost the entire thing at 1.5 speed, and I briefly turned it back to regular speed, and the guy sounded so drunk. No,
it's messed up because it happened to me in Stormlight. By the way, did you already re-drop Stormlight?
That's so.
Book 3's ass. You heard it here first. You can't get through it.
Book 3, first time I got like 3/4 of the way through, I started the book over from scratch because I'm like, I gotta give these books a fair shake because I fucking love the first 2.
Yeah.
That's not saying 3's all bad. There's some good ass shit in there, but I got even further in my read of book 3 than I did the first time, and I just couldn't do it.
Bradley, what if I told you that near universally book 3 is everyone's favorite?
That's what I've heard. Here's the thing: I legitimately only have like 3 hours left in the book 3.
Oh, come on! You could do it.
It's right there.
You could do it. Do it. That's that is 3 work days. That is like 3 work days, and you'll be done with it.
That's like 2 nights of grinding Kingdom Hearts.
I know.
Like, I don't know.
You can do it. It's personally my least favorite, but I do still enjoy a lot of it. So
yeah.
Anywho, bye-bye, everyone.
Peace.